If you live in New York, you might have seen the subway ads of Serena Williams injecting herself with GLP-1s. The company behind that ad is health tech company Ro, and this week it announced it is now offering the new Wegovy pill from Novo Nordisk. I want to bring on Zach Reitano, the co-founder and CEO of Ro, to talk about his business. Zach, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So this is the pill that you can take. This is not
Yeah.
we're done with injectables, or are those
I don't
going
know if
away?
we're done. I think this is a yes and. This
Yes,
is
and
really exciting. That's right. That's right.
but I mean, long term, I mean, the injectables they probably go away, right?
I think it'll depend on the individual. And the main reason is, so the amazing thing first to talk about the pill is I do think that it is going to usher in a new era of digital health, right? Direct to consumer health. It's the first time a drug of this size and scale launches nationwide on road. So someone can see an ad and go from diagnosis to delivery in 48 hours or less. And the cool part about this pill in particular right now is, one, it's more affordable. So it's $149 to start. But two, to your point, patients don't have to trade off between efficacy and the preferred form factor for many. So patients on treatment saw about 16 to 17% weight loss on the pill. That's going to be transformative. So it's a better form factor for many. It's more affordable, and it's available today on Ro. The thing that you mentioned, though, about injectables is you do see both current injectables. There are some where patients lose 20, 22%, and there are GLP-1s in the pipeline. Maybe people have heard of in Silicon Valley, maybe they've heard of Triple G or retatrutide, or CagriSema. There are others that are coming out in 26, 27, 28, and beyond, where patients are losing 25, 30% of their weight. And so you will usually see the pills be slightly less effective over in the fullness of time. So it really depends.
What about side effects? Is there any difference in terms of side
They're
effects?
quite comparable. The pill and the injectable. Yeah.
And generally speaking, I mean, side effects I mean, where are we in that story of people seeing any kind of adverse effects here?
Yeah, the typical ones that people see are, nausea, gastro challenges and issues. And they're, in terms of the frequency, over in the clinical trials, it might be 30, 40% of people, but the side effects, and it depends how wonky you want to get, they usually they subside over time. They're usually what are referred to as peak to trough side effects. So it's when people start or they escalate in dose, but people can, and there are ways to mitigate those things, and we educate patients and care for them along the way to help mitigate those, but people can get comfortable and subside over time.
I want to ask you a question about the broader healthcare landscape right now. It's been kind of a newsy week for the space because OpenAI has made this new, deeper push into health tech
Yeah, it's exciting.
with its new platform. And one of the interesting things that we've talked about on this show is OpenAI integrating with all these different platforms, not just in healthcare, but other apps and tools as well. But the broader question I have for you is, so OpenAI is going to make sense of all this data with ChatGPT, and maybe you can link up your MyFitnessPal or maybe your Apple Health at some point. And the business question that I have in my mind is, isn't there a risk that these companies integrating with ChatGPT could just end up cannibalizing their own business and the value proposition that they had in the first place? How do you think about that issue?
Well, if from our perspective, I think so first, I think it's a great launch. It's exciting. I think that the established healthcare system, I think over the last 20, 25 years has had its chance to use technology and clearly has come up short for a lot of people. And I think this is just a preview of things to come. So it is really exciting. I think for us, the thing that we really see about AI, and not only using it internally a bunch, but when you see right now in ChatGPT, oftentimes it'll caveat, or other AI LLMs, you'll see it'll caveat and says this is not meant to replace your provider. And so what we really think about is, okay, all of that data, how do we make it actionable? And at some point in time, right, we want to make that data actionable. And that might be a prescription, that might be provider guidance, whatever it may be. So for us, we actually just think that the more patients are engaged with their health, the more that they can turn that unstructured into structured data and get feedback in real time, the better off they'll be. I think an interesting analogy here for Silicon Valley that's obsessed with how does AI really spread throughout healthcare? I think driverless cars are actually a really good analogy here, right? And the reason I say that is you have some pockets where you'll see these very controlled experiments where they'll be fully autonomous, right? So that's like a Waymo driving around Palo Alto or SF. You'll see similar things in healthcare, right? So an insulin pump is sort of the V0. It's deterministic, but it's making automated decisions, right, in real time. You saw in Utah this week, Utah is rolling out a pilot where refill prescriptions can actually be done entirely by AI. So these very controlled experiments, and they'll roll them out over time. And then you do have the equivalent of what we've seen more in like Tesla FSD or lane assist or parking or things like that, where it complements the human driver. And you're going to see a lot of that as well, probably spread far faster. The interesting thing to me is the society's perspective is we have this massive supply chain shortage in healthcare, right? Too many people need it, too few to provide it. That's hopefully what AI does. The societal question I think we're facing it with driverless cars is basically like how much, it's an odd way to say it, but like how much death are we willing to tolerate in the interim? Because driverless cars in many ways, we don't hold the bar that they need to be better than the average driver or even the best driver. We hold the bar that they need to be 10x better. um, and I think we're probably going to do the same with healthcare, so it'll be interesting to see how it rolls out, but I
So,
think that's a good analogy for people.
so let me ask you another question there on that societal sort of piece of all this, which is that
Yeah.
we had a doctor on this show earlier this week talking about the question, who is accountable in the scenario where somebody goes to an AI platform for health advice and unfortunately something goes wrong? There is a question about, is it the platform? Was there a doctor at all in the loop?
Yeah.
How do you think about that question at Roe?
So for us, the way that we think about it is for things like that, the doctor will be in the loop, right? And I think there's very very clear regulatory guidelines in the practice of medicine. And I'll give an example of where we use AI to give our providers leverage while dramatically improving the patient experience. So right now, patients can report a side effect, and they could do that historically in a structured way. So what side effect they're experiencing, the severity, the duration, any other associated side effects, whether they can still move throughout their day or take the medication. And that would create a task for a provider to review. And 24/7, our side effect response time was under an hour. Then with the launch of these LLMs, we could take tremendously unstructured data and make it structured. So if you're talking to Ro and you send a message, every message is routed through an LLM. We can actually flag whether a side effect is reported in that unstructured message, create a task routed to a provider. And we've published this data. We've been able to reduce the speed with which a provider can respond to a side effect by 70%. So 24/7, the median response time to a side effect on Ro is 15 minutes. That was impossible to do
Hmm,
before LLMs. So
right.
I think it's going, and that's where I think again that the driverless cars are a good analogy because I think it's more familiar to people, but there's an entire spectrum of autonomous. There's multiple levels, how involved the human driver is, whether there's a test controlled pilot or highways or all of these different smaller pockets and use cases. So I think that's a good analogy, but that's how we think about it.
The last thing I want to ask you about before you go is this conversation around peptides is like everywhere now.
Yeah.
Everyone is talking about
Peptides and microdosing, right? It's a
peptides,
big concept now. Yeah.
microdosing. The idea of getting drugs or medications directly from a manufacturer, I don't know. I would
Yeah.
never do it, and I'm surprised if people do. But we are in this Silicon Valley era of people trying new things.
Yeah.
How do you think about moonshot bets at Roe, and what do you have your eye on in terms of innovations that are coming down the line?
Yeah, so there is this large, as you said, there's this large peptide craze. I think it's a very high level like generic term because I think the most popular peptide will be GLP-1s, like
Right, I was just gonna say, I
right.
mean, that is
So
literally a peptide.
it's literally a peptide. Insulin's a peptide. We've been treating, hundreds of millions of people have been taking peptides for the last basically century since insulin was invented about 100 years ago. So it's not a new concept. I think the same just needs to be applied. The same logic that we would apply would apply to this. I think what you're seeing with people taking more action and how I take this peptide craze or this microdosing craze. And by the way, I think microdosing, I have an issue with the term, which I'm happy to talk about it, which I think
Next
it's like,
next episode.
next time we can do it. But I think that what you are seeing, it's a signal of how fed up people are with the traditional system, right? They're taking more into their hands. COVID, I think we lost a lot of trust in institutions, and you're seeing that. I think this is just one other example of that. And but I do think that the traditional system, to your point with manufacturers, they are investing more in direct to consumer and empowering patients. And I think the companies that win in the future are the ones that lean into that and lean into empowering the patient and the provider to collaborate to achieve their goals.
Great. Well, Zach, I want to thank you for coming on. We appreciate it. And next time you come on, we will have you give us your hot takes on
Great.
microdosing. I'm sure that'll be a
I'd
fun
appreciate
conversation.
that.
That is
Thanks.
Zach
Thanks for the
Reitano,
time.
the co-founder and CEO of Row here on TITV.